She doesn't chase attention, approval, or validation yet somehow. The room shifts when she walks in, not because she's the loudest, but because her standards speak louder than words. In a world where most people bend to fit in, she refuses to shrink. And here's the truth. Most won't tell you standards aren't about being picky. They're about protecting your value. In the next few minutes, I'll show you 8 real-life moments where holding your standard changes everything from the way people treat you to the opportunities you attract. Stay until the end, because the last one is the difference between being respected and being forgotten. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. He was charming on paper, the kind of man who checked the boxes that used to make her say yes without thinking, successful, confident, persistent. He'd been texting her for days, suggesting a late dinner at a place everyone in the city was talking about. But when the night came, something in his tone made her pause. "Let's make it 9. I've got other plans before then," he said, almost as if she were the afterthought. No malice, no obvious insult, just a casual slip that told her exactly where she stood in his priorities. In the past, she would have brushed it off, told herself not to overthink, maybe even shown up, pretending it didn't matter. But that night, she didn't. She wrote back, "Thanks for the invite, but I'll pass." The silence that followed was deafening yet strangely freeing. There was no back and forth, no bargaining, no what's wrong from him, just nothing. And for once, that nothing didn't feel like rejection. It felt like self-respect. It's easy to think standards are about big, dramatic gestures like cutting someone out of your life or delivering an epic speech. But more often, they're built in moments like this one small no when it would have been easier to say yes just to keep the peace. Later that week, she noticed something shift in her. She walked into meetings with a steadier voice. She stopped rushing to fill every gap in conversation. She even caught herself smiling for no reason because deep down, she knew she'd protected her own dignity without anyone else's permission. Here's the part no one talks about. Every time you say no to something beneath your standard, you're saying yes to the life you actually want. It's not about punishing the other person. It's about honoring yourself enough to hold the line, even when no one's watching. If you've ever had a moment where you wanted to say no but didn't, ask yourself why. Was it fear of missing out? Fear of seeming difficult? Or was it because you forgot that you're allowed to decide what's worth your time? I'll tell you this, once you taste the calm that comes from not lowering your bar, you won't want to go back. And if you've had your own first no moment, I'd love to hear it. You might be surprised how many others will relate to your story. Sometimes, sharing it is just as empowering as living it. It was a Tuesday morning when her manager slid a stack of files onto her desk. "Can you handle this by Friday?" he asked casually, as if the question wasn't loaded. She glanced at the pile twice the normal workload, and none of it part of her actual job description. Before, she would have nodded with a smile, told herself it was a chance to prove she was a team player, and worked late into the night without so much as an acknowledgement. That was the old her, the one who thought saying yes to everything was the fastest route to respect. But this time, she paused. She straightened in her chair and said, "I'm happy to help where I can, but I'll need to adjust my current priorities or get additional support to meet that deadline." For a moment, he just looked at her, not angry, not offended, just surprised. It was as if no one had ever asked to set fair terms before. He cleared his throat. "All right, let's see what we can delegate." She didn't realize it then, but that moment was bigger than a schedule adjustment. It was the first time she claimed her value without apologizing for it. No excuses, no nervous laugh to soften the blow, just a clear, calm line. And the ripple effect was immediate. By the next week, the extra work requests slowed down. When she did take on something outside her role, it was framed as a collaboration, not a silent expectation. Colleagues began approaching her with more respect, and oddly enough, more genuine warmth. Here's the thing, people often treat you the way you've trained them to. If you've been the person who always says yes, no one will magically start respecting your limits unless you set them. It's not about being difficult, it's about refusing to make yourself small so others can be comfortable. As Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And sometimes, accepting yourself means defending the space you need to do your best work. Ask yourself this at your job: do you set the pace, or do you let others set it for you? If the answer makes you uneasy, maybe it's time to practice a new kind of yes, one that comes with conditions that honor your time and expertise. If you've ever had to draw a line at work, even in a small way, share it. You never know who in your circle needs the reminder that boundaries aren't just personal, they're professional, and they're powerful. It was supposed to be a promising night. They'd met through a mutual friend, exchanged a few messages, and agreed to meet at a small, candlelit bistro downtown. The air smelled of rosemary and fresh bread. Soft jazz played in the background. At first, everything seemed fine. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, and knew how to make her laugh. But somewhere between the second glass of wine and the entree, the cracks began to show. A subtle comment about her career, something that sounded like a joke, but landed like a jab. A story about an ex that went on too long, with a strange nostalgia in his voice. And then, the casual glance at his phone, mid-conversation. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cruel, but it was enough. Enough for her to recognize the early signs of someone who didn't value presence or her time. She remembered what she promised herself months ago if she saw red flags early. She wouldn't paint them white, so she smiled politely, waited for a natural pause, and said, "I think I'm going to head out. It was nice meeting you." His eyebrows lifted. "Already the night's still young?" "It is," she said calmly. "But I know my time's better spent elsewhere." Walking out into the crisp night air, she felt lighter not because she'd avoided something terrible, but because she'd honored her own standard before it was tested any further. That's the thing about walking away early. It's not about the other person's worth. It's about remembering yours. Most people think strength is staying until the bitter end, proving you can handle the discomfort. But in reality, strength is sometimes knowing you don't have to sit through a situation just to be polite. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," and who she truly was now was a woman who didn't linger where she wasn't seen. Think about it. How many times have you stayed in a conversation, a date, or a situation you knew wasn't right just because it felt awkward to leave? And what would your life look like if you gave yourself permission to exit sooner? If you've ever had a leave early moment, tell me about it. You might inspire someone else to choose themselves a little faster next time. It was Sunday afternoon, and her mother's kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls and brewed coffee. The kind of warm, familiar scent that could almost make her forget why she sometimes dreaded these gatherings. They were halfway through dessert when her aunt leaned across the table, fork in hand, and said, "So, when are you finally going to settle down? You're not getting any younger, sweetheart." She felt her shoulders tense. The question wasn't new. It had been wrapped in different words over the years, sometimes in concern, sometimes in teasing, but always carrying the same message: you're behind. Before, she would have laughed it off or changed the subject. Sometimes, she even played along, making light-hearted excuses to keep the peace. But not this time. She took a slow breath, looked her aunt in the eye, and said gently, "I'm not in a rush to fit into anyone else's timeline. My life is full, and I'm happy with where I am." A small silence fell over the table. Her aunt blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct but calm answer. Then her mother chimed in softly, "She's doing just fine. Trust me." The conversation shifted, and the tension dissolved. But inside, she felt something shift too. For the first time, she'd stood firm without letting defensiveness or guilt take over. She realized that peace wasn't just about avoiding conflict. It was about speaking the truth without sharp edges. Family can be the hardest place to set standards because love is tangled up with expectation. They think they know what's best for you. And maybe sometimes they do, but only you can decide if it's best for who you are now. Not the version they remember, Carl Jung once said. The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. Sometimes the pressure you feel isn't really about you. It's about someone else's unfulfilled dreams. If you've ever had to hold your ground with family without burning the bridge, you know it's an art. It's not about winning an argument. It's about staying centered in who you are. Even when the people who love you most don't understand your path. So let me ask, have you ever walked away from a family conversation feeling lighter because you told the truth? Without picking a fight, I'd love to hear how you did it. Your story might give someone else the courage to keep their peace and their boundaries. It was a Friday evening, and her group chat was buzzing. Last-minute plan downtown club. Everyone's coming. The messages flew in fast, peppered with emojis and inside jokes. A year ago, she would have been the first to say yes. She would have pushed through exhaustion, slipped into heels, and told herself, "It's just one night. I don't want to miss out." But that night, she stared at her phone, feeling the weight of the week in her shoulders. She could already picture it, the music so loud you can't hear your own thoughts. Overpriced drinks, and conversations that barely skim the surface. She didn't judge her friends for wanting it. It just wasn't what she needed anymore. So she typed, "Thanks for the invite, but I'm going to sit this one out tonight. Have fun for me," almost instantly. Her phone buzzed with responses. "Oh, come on. You're no fun anymore. Live a little, you've changed." She smiled. Yes. She had. And that was the point. Instead of rushing to defend herself, she tossed her phone on the couch, made a cup of tea, and pulled a blanket over her legs. She spent the night reading, journaling, and calling her sister just to catch up. When midnight came, she wasn't standing in a crowded bar, she was in bed, rested and at peace. Here's the thing, saying no to a night out doesn't mean you're boring, it means you're clear about what refuels you. Energy is currency, and she'd stopped giving it away just to keep a social image alive. The next morning, a friend texted, "Honestly, you were smart to skip it. It wasn't even that great." She chuckled, not because she'd won, but because she'd chosen herself without guilt. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And part of becoming yourself is learning that missing out on what drains you isn't a loss, it's a gain. If you've ever turned down an invite and later realized it was the best choice you could have made, You know the quiet victory it brings. And maybe someone out there needs to hear your story to give themselves permission to do the same. So I'm curious, what's one social event you skipped that made you grateful afterward? Your answer might just inspire someone else to choose their own peace next time. He was the kind of man who could light up a room just by walking in. Charming, magnetic, the kind of presence that made people lean in when he spoke, when they met. The chemistry was instant, so intense it almost felt like fate. He texted her at all hours, made big, spontaneous plans, and pulled her into whirlwind nights that felt like a movie. But between the highs came the lows, unpredictable moods, canceled plans, and a constant undercurrent of tension. One night, after a fight that started over something small but exploded into shouting, she found herself sitting alone in her car, gripping the steering wheel. Her heart was still racing, not from passion, but from the crash that followed it. She remembered something a friend once told her. If you're constantly waiting for the next high, you're probably addicted to the chaos, not the connection. And deep down, she knew that was true. The next morning, he sent a flood of apologetic texts. You know I didn't mean it. We're just passionate. This is what real love feels like. But she knew better now. Real love doesn't leave you anxious, guessing, or drained. Real love is steady enough to build on. So she called him not to argue, not to negotiate, but to end it. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I can't do this anymore. I need peace more than I need passion that burns me out. There was silence on the line. Then, disbelief. You're just going to walk away? Yes, she said. Because I finally learned that leaving doesn't mean losing, it means choosing. That night, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and lavender. For the first time in months, she felt her body unclench. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was healing. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For years, she had mistaken drama for destiny. But now, she was awake enough to see the difference. If you've ever walked away from something that felt intoxicating but left you empty, you know how hard it is, but you also know how worth it becomes. So tell me, have you ever had to choose calm over chaos? Even when your heart wanted to stay, your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to finally step out of the fire. It was the kind of email most people dream of getting. We'd like to formally offer you the position. The title was impressive. The salary was more than she'd ever made. The benefits were generous. On paper, it was perfect. But she'd been in enough offices, sat in enough meetings, and watched enough people wither under the wrong kind of leadership to know paper can lie. During the interview process, there had been signs. The way one executive bragged about expecting staff to push through burnout, the casual dismissal of work-life balance as a myth for the weak, the subtle tension in the room whenever certain topics came up. She noticed. She always noticed. A younger version of her would have ignored the red flags, telling herself, "It's just part of the game. I can handle it." But she was no longer that woman. She remembered a colleague from years ago, a woman who'd landed her dream job, but spent the next 2 years trapped in an environment so toxic it drained the light from her eyes. She vowed she wouldn't make that trade, no matter how shiny the offer looked. So she picked up the phone and called the hiring manager. Her tone was warm but unwavering. "I'm grateful for the offer," she said, "but I have to decline." There was a pause. Then came the predictable reply. "You're turning this down. This is a huge opportunity. For the right person, Yes, she said, but not for me. I've learned to value my peace too much to gamble it away. She hung up and felt an almost physical wave of relief. She wasn't walking away from success. She was walking toward a version of success that wouldn't cost her sanity. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, sipping coffee and looking at other opportunities. She felt a quiet certainty in her chest. She hadn't lost anything. She'd just made space for something better. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." She was awake now, and she knew exactly what she was worth. If you've ever turned down an opportunity that didn't align with your values, you understand the courage it takes and the peace that follows. So here's a thought. What's one thing you've said no to, even though the world expected you to say yes? Share it. Someone out there might need that reminder that turning down the wrong thing is what makes space for the right one. It was a Saturday morning when she realized something had shifted for good. She was sitting in her favorite cafe, sunlight pouring through the window, the smell of fresh coffee curling in the air. A friend across the table was venting about yet another relationship that had turned into a cycle of disappointment. "You've changed," her friend said suddenly, almost accusingly. "You don't even seem tempted by the wrong people anymore." She smiled. "That's because I've stopped negotiating with my own worth." Her standards weren't just about dating. They had spilled into every part of her life: friendships, work, how she spent her time, even the way she spoke to herself. She no longer made excuses for people who drained her. She no longer took opportunities that cost her peace. She no longer dressed, spoke, or acted to please the room. She had learned something powerful: standards aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates that only open for what truly deserves to enter. The funny thing was, once she stopped lowering the bar, the right people started showing up naturally. Friends who respected her boundaries. A man who didn't just match her energy but honored it. Opportunities that aligned with her vision, not just her resume. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." She finally understood that privilege. Setting her standard was not about arrogance, it was about alignment. Her life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt. But the difference was, she faced them from a place of self-respect instead of self-betrayal. Later that evening, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror. No makeup, hair in a loose bun, wearing her oldest sweatshirt. And she thought, "This is the woman I built my standards for." She didn't need the room to turn when she walked in. She didn't need applause. She didn't need to prove she was enough. She knew it. And in that knowing, she was free. If you've been listening to this story and felt something stir inside you, maybe it's time to raise your own standard. Not in one big, dramatic gesture, but in the quiet, daily choices that shape the life you want. So I'll leave you with this. What's one standard you're ready to set and never compromise on again? Write it down, say it out loud, or, if you're ready to make it real, share it in the comments. You never know who you might inspire, because sometimes the moment you set the standard is the moment your whole life begins to rise to meet it. When a woman decides to set her standard, she's not just changing how others treat her, she's rewriting the rules of her own life. From the way she handles love, to the way she chooses friends, to the opportunities she says yes or no to, every decision becomes an act of self-respect. It's not about being hard to please. It's about protecting the peace, the energy, and the value you've spent years building. And here's the truth when you refuse to lower your standard. Life has no choice but to rise to meet it. If this story made you stop and think about the boundaries you deserve to set, then you've already taken the first step. Now take the next one, subscribe, so you never miss the tools, insights, and real stories that help you live life on your terms. And if this spoke to you, drop a quick "This is me" in the comments. It might just be the nudge someone else needs today.